And joining me now is CBS News weather producer David Parkinson. David, thanks for being with us. What can you tell us about Florence? Has it been picking up steam?
It has been re-intensifying. So it was at 140, it went down to 130. We're back to 140 miles an hour, and we're now at our fastest forward progress yet at 17 miles an hour. The problem is it doesn't look like it's going to stay that way. We're now 785 miles off the coast, so we're well under 1,000 miles, and we are on track now for Friday for your landfall point. So here's the key thing to note. This was originally a Thursday night, Friday morning. Now it looks like as late as Friday lunchtime for a landfall as either a high-end Category 3 or a low-end Category 4.
And what will account for whether or not it makes that Category 4 status?
So it may get up right close to being a Category 5. So 157 is a Category 5. We're looking at a 155 forecast. The question is, when it approaches the coast, it's going to slow down. How much it slows down, how much water it brings up from the bottom, called upwelling, that can cause it to lose some steam, but it's right on that teeter. It doesn't really matter, though. Whether it's a 4 or a 3, it's mainly academic. The difference between 125 mile an hour and 130 mile an hour wind is negligible.
So what is most concerning to you about this storm? It is most definitely life-threatening, is it not?
Yeah, and there's really three. This is an all-threat storm, but I want to rank them in order of threats. So storm surge is the #1 killer in hurricanes. It is the #1 threat out of this storm because we have a storm surge up to 15 feet. The second one is going to be your inland freshwater flooding, and that's going to go from the coast all the way to the inland, 15 to 30 inches. And there are models that are suggesting we could be over 2.5 feet when this storm is done. And then the final one is the wind. If it makes landfall as a Category 4 at 130 miles an hour, it's only going to do so for a 15 to 20 mile radius right near where that landfall location is. So your odds of getting hit by that are much lower than the others. It's also why wind is one of the lower killers of hurricanes compared to both kinds of water threats.
Now, David, I know that you've analyzed dozens of models, and they all have, the storm hitting landfall at slightly different areas. To your mind, where is it most likely to hit, and what time roughly on Friday afternoon now are we looking at?
So we could be anywhere between noon and 2 p.m. is possible. So here's the interesting thing. The place you don't want to be in a hurricane is in the northeast quadrant, the front right quadrant. And that's because all of the water is getting piled into the back bays. That gives you your storm surge. That's where you've got the best chance of tornadoes. It's where the strongest rain bands are, and it's where the strongest wind is. So if we take a look at where that is, you can see we kind of put a little diagonal crossbow on this one, and you can see it's to the north and east of that center, but it's right along the coast from Atlantic Beach on up into the Outer Banks and then inland towards New Bern, towards Greenville, all of those places into it. You can see the water's actually being pushed away from Wilmington. The question is exactly where does that sort of center line set up? It could be south, it could be north, but we think that's a pretty good approximation.
You're talking about right there is going to be the hardest hit, right up there?
So that's your center right there. That's your eye. And then so the worst would be right in this area, and then it will track probably inwards a little bit from there.
And what counties are those?
So that is right along Atlantic Beach down to Morehead City. And then inland, New Bern would be your biggest city just inland of there.
So you would recommend anyone in that area to definitely evacuate?
Yeah, I mean, if you are in a coastal area in that yellow shaded region, absolutely you should evacuate. The evacuation orders are there, and they are not for your health.
Right. Yeah.
They are, but they are not just doing it for their health. They're doing it for your health.
Right.
They're doing it for you to stay alive. If you are in South Carolina, if you are south of Wilmington, the urgency is less. You need to keep monitoring this storm. But this is a serious, serious situation.
Is there anything that we don't know about Florence that we should know?
Yeah, well, so there's a lot that we as forecasters don't know. So here's the interesting thing. We've got a storm that's going to be moving to the coast, and then it's just going to stop. And here's why. So we've got high pressure and a ridge to the north. We got high pressure to the west. And then we got a low pulling it a little bit to the south. It's kind of boxed in. So the question is, when the forward progress halts, does it happen right after it makes landfall? Does it happen right off the coast? If it happens off the coast, that's worse.
Why is that worse?
So that's worse because the storm stays over water and it doesn't lose strength. You need to have friction with land for the storm to decrease in strength and intensity. Instead, it just keeps using its reserve pool of water that it's over and continues to pummel the coast with the wind, the storm surge, and the waves.
But if it stays off the coast, then you don't have the possibility of the same kind of flooding, correct?
Well, you have the coastal flooding is worse, right? Because all of that coastal flooding is getting shoved in that way. Because remember, we have that counterclockwise move around the storm. So that's that front right quadrant. And you stay in that front right quadrant the entire time if you're off the coast and it's just meandering a little bit off.
So, David, tell us about shelters. I mean, there's been a lot of talk about whether everyone should evacuate because it's going to slow everything down, whether people should hunker down. Are shelters a viable option with a storm like this? Is any shelter prepared for this kind of storm?
Yeah, I mean, again, like we are not talking about a giant wind field that we've got to contend with that's going to destroy the shelters. Most of them should be rated to a Category 3, you would hope. Right. But here's the interesting thing, right? If you are in an area in this map, and you are in an area that is showing any kind of color, this is at least 6 feet of storm surge, which is good enough to pretty much cover up your entire first level of your house. If you're in that area, this is not a question. This is not a good negotiation. Get out tomorrow. Your last chance to get out realistically is probably midday Thursday. After that, the conditions deteriorate too much, and you are literally putting your life at risk if you don't do that. If you are further inland, if you're in a Charlotte, if you're in a Fayetteville, if you're not in a flood-prone area, you're fine. Stay where you are. Hunker down. If you are in a flood-prone area, protect your home, and then make the decision. But if you're evacuating, you can't just go a little bit inland. You have to go far away because the rain threat from this one does extend into central North Carolina.
So the time is now. Start making those preparations.
Absolutely. The time was yesterday. Right. The time is now to start getting out.
David Parkinson, thank you so much.